What life was really like in America in 1900? The secrets behind an era of change. What if you woke up in America in 1900? No smartphones, no cars buzzing by, just the hiss of steam, the clang of industry, and a fight to get by. It was a nation straddling two worlds, old traditions and rapid change. In this video, we'll explore the surprising realities of daily life in a country standing at the crossroads of past and progress. America, a nation of opposites. The year 1900 wasn't just the start of a new century. It was a pivotal moment in U.S. history, a time of transition when even the language felt small. It was an era where America still carried the heavy imprint of the 19th century. Queen Victoria still reigned in England, and Newton's laws still largely governed science. Yet simultaneously it marked the beginning of great breakthroughs, fresh ideas, and unprecedented technologies that would shape the 20th century. The stark contrast between tradition and innovation was the red thread weaving through the tapestry of America at this time. To better visualize this difference, consider that even the English language itself was still small compared to today. Many words and concepts we now take for granted, familiar in modern life like radio, movie, crossword puzzle, tractor, truck, tank, or electronics, hadn't yet appeared or weren't widely common. This highlights the nascent stages of industries and technologies we enjoy today. Even social and medical concepts such as camouflage, propaganda, cafeteria, vaccination, income tax, feminists, jazz, gospel, neon light, schizophrenic, or psychotic were not widely known or didn't carry the same meaning as they do now. This not only reflects the absence of technological inventions, but also reveals the rudimentary understanding of medicine, psychology, and complex social structures that we've developed since. A world without these concepts was an entirely different world, where human communication, entertainment, and perceptions of illness and society were far more rudimentary. The most profound division we can observe was in the polarized life, urban versus rural. In 1900, there was no such thing as an average American life. This was due to the astonishing geographical, economic, and cultural diversity sprawling across a vast continent. America was a nation of extremes, where modernity and backwardness coexisted. Despite a vast railroad network spanning 250,000 miles connecting the states, the reality was that many Americans still lived hundreds of miles from the tracks, astonishingly isolated. This meant that for millions, life revolved around agricultural cycles, with very little contact with the outside world or modern conveniences. In northwestern states like Oregon and Washington, rivers remained the primary routes for transport and commerce, underscoring the reliance on traditional means of travel. Western states such as Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas were home to distant, isolated farming communities, where rudimentary houses were built without electricity or running water, and life depended entirely on the benevolence of nature. Life there was harsh, with freezing winters and dry summers, demanding resilience and self-sufficiency. Conversely, modernization was primarily concentrated in the northeastern urban centers. Here you'd find gas streetlights illuminating the avenues, indoor plumbing systems providing unprecedented convenience, and industrialization, booming, transforming cities into hubs of innovation and opportunity. New York, Chicago, Boston, and Philadelphia were prime examples of rapidly growing metropolises, attracting waves of immigrants and rural residents seeking work and a better life. Most of the country, particularly west of the Mississippi River and south of the Ohio River, remained significantly undeveloped, living in conditions that modern city dwellers would find hard to imagine. This disparity wasn't just material but also extended to educational opportunities, healthcare, and access to information, painting a clear picture of stark contrasts across America. One of the greatest burdens of this period, especially in the South, was the burden of the South and the sharecropping system. More than 30 years after the U.S. Civil War, the South was still struggling to recover. The region had virtually no developed industries, and agriculture, the backbone of its economy, remained inefficient due to lack of capital, outdated technology, and especially an antiquated social system. The The most heartbreaking reality was that 9 out of 10 African Americans still lived in the South, and astonishingly, 80% of them were sharecroppers. This sharecropping system was not just a farming method, but a vicious cycle of inescapable debt and poverty. Sharecroppers had to rent land, seeds, equipment, housing, and even food from landowners. The problem was that landowners often kept secret ledgers, and sharecroppers had no way of knowing their account status or challenging the prices of the crops they harvested. As a result, most harvests weren't enough to break even, leaving sharecroppers perpetually indebted and tied to the land, unable to escape poverty. This was a subtle form of exploitation, preventing African Americans, even after emancipation from slavery, from achieving true economic freedom. Life under the sharecropping system was a continuous struggle from dawn to dusk, with a faint hope for a good harvest to cover debts, but that hope was frequently extinguished. Furthermore, the division was also evident in the disparity of living conditions and opportunities among different ethnic groups and social classes. Whether in bustling cities or remote rural areas, the poor consistently faced immense challenges. They lived in cramped, unsanitary slums in cities or in dilapidated shacks in the countryside. Disease, malnutrition, and lack of education were pervasive issues affecting millions of families. The healthcare system was rudimentary, with epidemics like cholera and yellow fever still posing significant threats, especially to children and poor laborers. Stepping into a new era, technology and inventions that changed life. The year 1900 marked an explosive era, a powerful industrial revolution and urbanization, reshaping the entire United States. This was a period where steel, a revolutionary material, became the backbone of unprecedented development. Ohio and Pennsylvania transformed into massive steel production centers, churning out millions of tons of steel each year. This very boom turned names like John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie into some of the world's most powerful billionaires, controlling colossal industrial empires. Steel didn't just enrich a select few. It also transformed cities into modern metropolises, attracting millions from rural areas seeking opportunity. Major cities like New York, Chicago, and Pittsburgh became vibrant industrial hubs, where towering factories sprung up, spewing smoke into the sky and providing jobs for a massive labor force. This urbanization changed the face of America, creating new economic and cultural centers where people could access conveniences and opportunities previously unimaginable. The advent of steel also laid the groundwork for a revolution in architecture. Architect Ed Sullivan, dubbed the father of the skyscraper, pioneered the use of steel as the skeletal framework for buildings. Thanks to this, 30 to 40-story buildings began appearing in New York and Chicago, breaking previous height limitations for constructions. These skyscrapers were not only symbols of technical advancement, but also testaments to America's ambition and confidence in the new era. Beyond architecture, steel was also a key material for constructing railway lines, streetcar tracks, and colossal bridges like the Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and East River bridges. These bridges not only connected regions, but were also engineering marvels, reducing travel time and boosting commerce. In parallel, subway systems began to appear in major cities like Boston and Paris, offering efficient public transportation solutions. New York's Broadway subway line, inaugurated in 1904, cut a journey from 1 hour to just 10 minutes, completely changing how people traveled and worked in urban areas. This helped alleviate surface traffic congestion and expanded accessibility to further areas for workers, contributing to urban development. This era simply cannot overlook the great minds and life-changing inventions. Thomas Edison, dubbed the Wizard of Menlo Park, continuously delivered revolutionary inventions. His electric light illuminated every home, replacing oil lamps and candles, providing safer and more convenient lighting. His phonograph brought music into every household, transforming how people entertain themselves. And the kinetoscope, a personal film viewing device, opened the first door to cinema, laying the groundwork for the colossal entertainment industry that followed. The modern age truly exploded from his laboratory in New Jersey. These inventions were not just convenient gadgets, They were tools that transformed lifestyles, creating new experiences and broadening human horizons. However, life didn't just change in the cities. It also transformed in rural areas thanks to the era of automobiles and personal freedom. In 1900, automobiles were still a luxury item, with only about 8,000 cars across the US and less than 10 miles of paved roads. They were considered toys for the rich, symbols of status and wealth. However, Henry Ford changed everything. In 1908, he introduced mass production via the assembly line, creating cars that were cheaper and more accessible to the general public. Ford's dream was to make affordable cars for the average worker, and he turned that dream into reality. By the end of the decade, over 200,000 cars were on the roads, with more than half being Fords. The widespread adoption of automobiles brought unprecedented personal freedom, allowing people to travel further, explore new places, and connect isolated communities. Alongside the automobile, a series of breakthroughs in communication, transportation, and aviation also occurred. The Kodak Brownie camera, launched in 1900, made photography popular and affordable, allowing everyone to capture everyday moments. Guglielmo Marconi sent the first radio signal from England to Newfoundland in 1901, ushering in the era of wireless communication, laying the groundwork for radio and television later. Electric train experiments took place in upstate New York in 1904, and streetcars appeared in every major city, significantly improving public transport systems. And we cannot forget the Wright brothers, who made their historic 12.5-second flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, in 1903, opening the aviation era and forever changing how humans travel and perceive the world. These inventions were not just technological leaps, but crucial milestones in bridging geographical and informational distances, bringing greater connectivity and convenience to human life. However, not all fields progressed at the same pace. Scientific and medical advancement still faced many challenges. Although Albert Einstein published 3 mathematical formulas that rocked the scientific world and established quantum theory in 1905, medicine was a more lagging science. Deadly epidemics like cholera, diphtheria, and yellow fever still raged due to a lack of understanding of how they spread. This shows that despite brilliant minds and great inventions, humans still had much to learn about their own bodies and the microbial world around them. An unexpected solution to medical problems came from the construction of the Panama Canal. There, American engineers implemented an innovative drainage system to eradicate mosquitoes, significantly improving workers' health and reducing disease. Improvements in sanitation and understanding of microorganisms, thanks to 19th century discoveries, helped reduce the incidence of infectious diseases. For example, the tuberculosis mortality rate significantly decreased from 194 per 100,000 people in 1900 to 46 per 100,000 people in 1946-1940. This demonstrates that the combination of engineering, science, and public hygiene was key to overcoming the greatest health challenges. Of all the changes and inventions of the 1900s we've discussed, what do you think had the most lasting impact on American life and why? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Social burdens and reform movements. Behind the brilliant tapestry of technology and invention lay a sad, dark side: worker exploitation and child labor. It's ironic that the lives of most Americans actually worsened as industrialization boomed. People seemed to become tiny, vulnerable cogs in a colossal industrial machine where profit was prioritized above all else. Workers had almost no power or voice. They were exploited with harsh working conditions and astonishingly low wages. A typical workday often stretched 12 to 14 hours, 6 days a week, with wages of only about $1 to $2 per day. To put that into perspective, $1 to $2 in 1900, despite having higher purchasing power than today, was still a very low income, barely enough to subsist and insufficient to improve one's life. Factories were often dirty, noisy, and dangerous, with frequent workplace accidents due to a lack of basic safety measures. Machinery lacked protective barriers, and toxic fumes and chemicals filled the air, causing respiratory illnesses and chronic health problems for laborers. The situation worsened as unions were deemed illegal. Those who dared to organize unions to demand workers' rights were often brutally suppressed, treated like criminals. They could be immediately fired, blacklisted by factories, or even attacked by private company security forces. The absence of legal regulations protecting workers allowed factory owners to exploit them freely without significant resistance. And another brutal reality was child labor. In 1900, a quarter of boys aged 12 to 16 were laborers. These children, instead of attending school and playing, had to work 12-hour shifts in terrible and dangerous conditions in textile mills, mines, or on farms. Their physical and mental health were severely affected. They were exposed to dangerous machinery, coal dust, toxic chemicals, or worked under harsh sun and fields, leading to injuries, illness, and malnutrition. Many adolescents had no choice but to drop out of school to earn extra income, however meager, to help their families make ends meet. This stripped millions of American children of their educational opportunities and bright futures. The reality of the landscape of poverty and living conditions was also very concerning. The average annual income for a family in 1900, if converted to current value, was about $3,000. This figure might not seem too bad compared to incomes in some developing countries today, but it's important to remember that at the time, families lacked the basic conveniences we now take for granted. Most homes had no indoor running water, telephones, cars, or electricity. This meant that every daily task from laundry and cooking to personal hygiene required immense effort and time. About half of American children lived in persistent poverty, lacking nutrition and education. Malnutrition made them susceptible to illness, hindering their physical and intellectual development. The lack of education created a vicious cycle of poverty, as subsequent generations didn't have the necessary skills to escape hardship. Although America was undergoing rapid industrialization, wealth was concentrated among a small minority, creating an extremely wide wealth gap and causing pressing social problems. Facing these brutal realities, a powerful wave of reform emerged, known as the Progressive Era. This was a broad movement aimed at addressing the social, economic, and political issues caused by industrialization and urbanization. Progressive reformers, including journalists, scholars, lawyers, and social activists, strive to improve living and working conditions for ordinary people. One of the most prominent figures of this period was President Theodore Roosevelt. He was a progressive who fought for a square deal for all Americans. Roosevelt was the first president to dare challenge the power of industrial and financial tycoons, who had amassed enormous fortunes by exploiting workers and manipulating markets. He used government authority to regulate large corporations, protect consumers, and improve working conditions. The rise of muckrakers, investigative journalists, also played a crucial role in exposing the dark underbelly of society. These courageous journalists like Ray Stannard Baker and Lincoln Steffens wrote in-depth investigative articles, revealing political corruption, terrible living conditions in slums, and exploitation in industry. Notably, Upton Sinclair's novel The Jungle shockingly and realistically exposed the unsanitary and brutal conditions in Chicago's meatpacking industry. This book created a wave of public outrage, leading to the enactment of the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act in 1906, important laws aimed at protecting consumer health. Among the reform battles, the fight against child labor was one of the most significant efforts. Social reformers, labor organizations, and religious groups collectively fought to protect children from exploitative labor. They organized protests, lobbied, and gathered evidence of child labor's devastating impact on children's health and futures. In 1904, the National Child Labor Committee, NCLC, was founded with the primary goal of investigating and publicizing instances of child labor, while also lobbying for legislation to prohibit or restrict it. These efforts led to the enactment of important laws, although not all were immediately successful. The Keating-Owen Act of 1916, one of the first federal attempts to regulate child labor, was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. However, the struggle continued and ultimately succeeded with the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA of 1938, which mandated minimum ages and working conditions for children nationwide ending a dark era in American labor history. Want more content like this? A simple yes in the comments helps us know you're still here and loving it. Racial discrimination and the fight for equality. While America was booming with technology and reform movements, another side of society was steeped in the darkness of injustice and violence. Legalized racial segregation, separate but equal. In 1896, a year before the new century began, the Plessy versus Ferguson case legalized the U.S. Supreme Court's separate but equal doctrine. In theory, this policy declared that racial separation was legal as long as facilities for black and white people were of equal quality. In reality, however, this was merely a facade to mask brutal racial discrimination, a legal tool to legitimize the oppression of people of color. Consequently, white-only signs became ubiquitous, from schools, hospitals, and restaurants to public transportation. These signs were not just physical markers, but declarations stripping people of color of their freedom, dignity, and opportunities. African Americans were denied access to high-quality education, adequate healthcare services, and fair employment opportunities, creating an invisible but firm barrier preventing their societal advancement. This segregation was never truly equal, always ensuring that black people received lower quality facilities and fewer opportunities than white people. This separate but equal policy was enforced by a harsh set of laws known as Jim Crow laws and violence. Jim Crow laws established a deeply entrenched and comprehensive racially segregated society in the southern states. These laws not only mandated segregation in every aspect of public life, but also turned a blind eye to, and even encouraged, white violence against African Americans. Brutal and horrific lynchings against African Americans were a common and heartbreaking phenomenon. In the 1890s, there were over 200 lynchings annually in the Deep South, with victims often hanged or burned alive before crowds, and not a single perpetrator was punished. These extreme acts of violence were not only intended to terrorize, but also to maintain white supremacy and reinforce the system of racial segregation. Black men also lost their right to vote through new state constitutions, promoting white supremacy. Sophisticated methods like poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses were used to disenfranchise nearly all African Americans, even though they nominally had this right after the Civil War. This eliminated their political voice, making them even more vulnerable to oppression. Jim Crow regulations absurdly and unreasonably restricted interactions between black and white people. For example, in Birmingham, Alabama, checkers was forbidden to be played together by black and white individuals. This illustrates the extreme level of control this system imposed on daily life, aiming to prevent any contact or integration between the two races. The name Jim Crow originated from a minstrel character, a simplistic and humorous caricature of African Americans, symbolizing white control and denial of power over them. To protect themselves and seek a better life, African Americans began a major migration out of the Deep South. Although the Great Migration truly boomed in later decades, by 1900, the first signs of this shift had already appeared. They established all-black towns in Florida, Missouri, Arkansas, and Mississippi, creating self-sufficient, safe, and self-governing communities. In these communities, African Americans could build their own schools, churches, and businesses, creating spaces where they could live and thrive without facing constant discrimination and violence. In this arduous struggle, black leaders and their paths to activism played an immensely crucial role. The two most prominent figures were Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, who held differing philosophies but shared the common goal of improving life for African Americans. Booker T. Washington, president of the Tuskegee Institute, believed in economic development and vocational education. He founded the Urban League in 1907, an organization that helped black people find jobs and adapt to urban life, emphasizing the importance of self-reliance and building a solid economic foundation. Washington believed that through hard work, resourcefulness, and wealth accumulation, African Americans would gradually earn respect and equal rights in society. Conversely, W.E.B. Du Bois, a writer and scholar, believed in direct activism for equal rights. He was the founder of the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, In 1909, an organization aimed at combating racial discrimination through legal means and political advocacy. Du Bois famously prophesied in 1904, "The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line." He believed that only through persistent demands and struggle for civil and political rights could African Americans achieve true equality. These two philosophies, though different, both contributed to fueling the later civil rights movement. The harsh reality and life expectancy for African Americans in 1900 clearly reflected the hardships they faced. At that time, there were 8,833,994 African Americans, accounting for 11.6% of the total U.S. population. However, the average life expectancy for African Americans was only 33 years, while for white people it was 48 years. This significant disparity was a painful testament to the lack of healthcare, nutrition, terrible living conditions, and violence they faced daily. Although slavery was abolished in 1865, African Americans still did not have true equal rights. They were still considered second-class citizens, deprived of rights and opportunities. However, amidst these harsh circumstances, a black middle class tirelessly worked to improve living conditions and education for their children. They laid a solid foundation for the great civil rights movements of the future. The song "Lift Every Voice and Sing," composed in 1900, became the national anthem for African Americans, a symbol of their hope, resilience, and longing for freedom. Daily life and entertainment. After learning about the major challenges and advancements, let's explore the daily life of Americans in 1900. A life vastly different from ours today, dominated by a slow pace and manual labor. The rhythm of life was much slower than at present, requiring everyone to be self-sufficient and put in a great deal of effort for daily tasks. Most things were done entirely by hand, from sewing clothes, making butter, cleaning the house, to hand-washing laundry, which was a laborious and time-consuming chore. For laborers and miners, life was even harsher, as they had to work 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. These jobs were not only physically demanding, but also fraught with danger, with frequent accidents due to a lack of safety regulations. Children were no exception. Most did not attend school but had to work in factories or in the fields to help their families. Life was a constant struggle for survival and sustenance, with very little time for entertainment or personal development. Regarding the educational landscape in 1900, the public education system was very rudimentary compared to today. In 1860, there were only about 40 public high schools across the entire U.S. Most children attended private schools, church or community-supported schools, or were homeschooled. Especially in rural areas, one-room schools were the standard model, with about 190,000 such schools by late 1919. In these schools, one teacher would instruct all ages and subjects in the same room. Education primarily focused on basic knowledge such as reading, writing, history, science, and math. The common teaching method was rote memorization, with the famous saying, "Repetition is the beginning of all learning." Although the education system was limited, the illiteracy rate among young people, around 1919 to 1920, was only about 6%, indicating that despite difficulties, learning was still emphasized. As night fell, electric lights transformed cities into magical playgrounds, ushering in a new era of booming entertainment. Sports, amusement parks, films, music. Sports became an important part of life, attracting large crowds. Boxing, baseball, and horse racing were the most popular sports, with new stadiums like Polo Grounds and Shibe Park being built to meet fan demand. The first World Series took place in 1903, and the first Rose Bowl in 1902, marking the birth of iconic major American sporting events. Amusement parks also became attractive destinations. Coney Island in New York was a colossal entertainment paradise, distinguished by over 1 million dazzling electric lights and countless rides, attracting millions of visitors annually. It was a place where people could escape the worries of daily life and immerse themselves in a world of joy and excitement. Cinema also began to take off. Nickelodeon screened flicks and movies for just 5 cents, making cinematic entertainment more accessible to the masses. The Great Train Robbery, 1903 was the first hugely successful narrative silent film, opening up enormous potential for the film industry. Music also underwent a revolution, with ragtime and jazz beginning to dominate phonograph record sales after they were first sold in 1901. Works by John Philip Sousa and Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag became extremely popular. However, not everyone embraced these new music genres. Some cultural critics expressed concerns about the social decadence brought by the new music, showing the conflict between tradition and modernity. Alongside these new forms of entertainment, people still found joy in the simple pleasures of daily life. They often socialized with neighbors, fostering closer community ties. Reading books, writing letters, playing musical instruments, and engaging in handicrafts like sewing and knitting were common activities in households. Gardening was also a pastime and a way to be self-sufficient in food. Outdoor activities were also highly popular. Walking, cycling, playing informal sports, and visiting parks and beaches were ways for people to enjoy fresh air and exercise. Life might have been difficult and challenging, but Americans in 1900 still found simple joys and happy moments in their daily lives and in the development of new forms of entertainment. Which 1900s entertainment or daily activity do you find most surprising or nostalgic? America's position on the world stage. As the new century dawned, the United States was no longer an isolated nation, but was ready to assert its position on the world stage. President McKinley successfully declared the open door policy, believing it would stabilize the economy and lead to a glorious new era. This policy called for the abolition of tariffs and mutual openness for raw materials and investment, aiming to ensure access to the Chinese market for all major powers, preventing any single nation from monopolizing it. This was a crucial step, marking a shift from a foreign policy solely focused on domestic affairs to a more dynamic role in international relations. However, this open-door policy was immediately tested in the Philippines. After the Spanish-American War, the U.S. transformed from a liberating force into an aggressor as the Philippines sought independence. The Filipino uprising against the U.S. resulted in significant losses. Thousands of Americans and over 16,000 Filipinos died in battle, along with 100,000 Filipinos dying from famine and war-related diseases. This war exposed a major contradiction in U.S. policy. On one hand, opposing European imperialism, but on the other, promoting its own economic and cultural values through military intervention. Philippine Governor William Howard Taft later suppressed the rebellion with relatively liberal policies, granting Filipinos suffrage and self-governance, laying the foundation for the Philippines' later independence. Another significant event marking the U.S. position was the rise of Theodore Roosevelt. In September 1901, President McKinley was assassinated by anarchist Leon Czolgosz. Theodore Roosevelt, then vice president, became the youngest president in U.S. history at 45. He quickly asserted himself as an enemy of corruption and a protector of public interest, fighting for a square deal for all Americans. Roosevelt intervened in miners' strikes, protected workers' rights, and broke up large corporate monopolies, demonstrating a more active government role in the economy and society. He also pursued a strong conservation policy, doubling the number of national parks and adding millions of acres to national forests, protecting the country's valuable natural resources for future generations. On the international stage, Roosevelt cemented the U.S.'s position as a true world power. He wanted America to become the dominant power on the Pacific shore, and sent the Great White Fleet around the world to showcase the rising naval strength of the United States. This was a strategic move aimed at asserting American global influence and sending a message that the U.S. was a power not to be overlooked. His acquisition of the Panama Canal from Colombia exemplified his speak softly and carry a big stick approach to foreign policy. Roosevelt believed the canal was essential for American security and economic interests, and he did not hesitate to use military and diplomatic power to achieve that goal. This action, though controversial, solidified America's role as a global power capable of decisive action to protect its interests. On the global stage, 1900 also saw many turmoil and seeds of war. Uprisings against foreign dominance occurred everywhere, exemplified by the Boxer Rebellion in China in 1900, showing the increasing dissatisfaction of oppressed nations. The Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, shocked Europe when a white nation was defeated by a colored race, signaling a shift in the global power order. Signs of the weakening British Empire also became evident, with Australia gaining independence in 1901 and the Boer War revealing challenges to what was once the world's most powerful empire. The threat of war formed in Europe, with Austria-Hungary's annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1905, leading to the formation of the Mlada Bosna terrorist group and sowing the seeds for World War I just a decade later. The year 1900 was not just a pivotal year for the United States, but for the entire world. America stepped out of its isolation to assert its status as a great power, while also witnessing geopolitical shifts reshaping the global map and sowing the seeds for major conflicts in the future. Thanks so much for joining us. If this trip down memory lane made you smile, be sure to hit like and subscribe so you're always part of our next adventure. And don't forget to share this video with friends. Let's keep exploring the past and uncovering amazing stories together.